Can everyone hear?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So someone's going, okay. Well, good morning to everybody. I'd like first of all call this meeting of the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights, April 21, 2022 meeting to order. And the first items of business is a confirmation of quorum and confirmation of public notice.
We do have a quorum and public notice was sent.
Okay. And the next item is public participation. Anyone public for participation today?
There have been no signups for participation this
Okay.
week.
Then the next item of business is the approval of the March 17, 2022 minutes. May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Been moved and second that the minutes be approved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand. Okay. And then we move immediately to section report. The first one up is the executive director's report.
So good morning, everybody. First, welcome to the people who are here to our first in person. I didn't realize for some people it's your first time being in this building. So it's really good to have people here. I think we have a few more who are joining us shortly. The first thing I wanted to do is just really talk about our changes. I put it in the report, but we do have a few changes that have happened since the last time that we met. Commissioner Fuentes. We have two people leaving. Kristen is leaving from her staff attorney mediation position, and Erin Spalding is also just left last week. She took a different position with the city and will be working with the city of Louisville on police investigations. And so Erin is, we wanted to thank both of them for their time that they spent here, and Erin especially with her years of service to the commission and helping lead our enforcement unit and making sure that we were able to keep running. I was hopeful she'd be able to be here today to say goodbye, but she will be able to reach out and talk to her if you would like to do so. And then in that same spirit, I wanted to welcome Sana Bari, who is joining to take Kristen's place as a staff attorney and doing mediations. And then Sana, if you want to introduce yourself for a second.
And I'll move here so that people who are not physically present can see me. There I am. I am Sana Bari. I just left my position as attorney at the public defender's office right down the street. This is an exciting opportunity, and I feel very fortunate to join the commission. I look forward to doing the work. Good to meet you all.
Thanks, Sana. So I did want to do a quick overview of what happened in the legislative session. I know I spoke a little bit about it in the written report, but we were not able to get all of the increased funding that we had wanted. The governor's office did the generous proposal. The House cut that completely. The Senate gave us more. And then in the conference committee conversation, it ended up ultimately being a $24,000 increase, plus our federal spend, our federal allotment, which ended up being a little bit over $200,000 that we'll have to spend next year or this fiscal year or this coming fiscal year for the office. And then I know some people had questions about the overall 8% raises and the 12% raises next year. I reached out, and Brandon also reached out to get clarity on how that would work. This year, we won't have any new appropriation for that July 1 increase for everyone, but what I was told, hopefully this happens, but what I was told is they will then go back and look, budget director and people who are working on the personnel side and just looking at what needs to be allocated to a portion for those increases. So it doesn't help us for this July 1 increase. Luckily, we have that from our federal money that we haven't spent yet to cover. And then once they do that reapportionment, then we should see an increase in what comes in. I know that was probably confusing in written form, and so I wanted to say that out loud.
It didn't get any clearer in oral form either.
They'll look and see next year what we need to cover those raises. That's
So did they allocate a pool of money for raises and left it to the budget office to allocate that to the agencies, or how does that work?
that's how it was explained to me, is that it was an allocation that then they'll disperse through personnel and the budget director's office on which agency and office needs what amount of that money that they set aside. So when that happens, I will make sure to follow up on what that looks like. And then lastly, just since for those who are coming in person, before we turn over to our conversation for this month, if you are here in person, there are, for those of you who haven't done this before, you have a reimbursement form that's with you in a folder, and you don't have to fill out the timesheet because they've adjusted that. But you just fill it out, and if you just do your name and sign it, we can go in and put your personnel number later. And then whenever we leave, just leave it in the folder, and then we'll collect them, and then all of that will get issued to you to get reimbursed. So just leave it. You don't have to, you just have to sign your name and put what the expenses were, and then we'll take it and handle it from there. As we've been doing our monthly conversations, I really am excited about this one. Today we have Gina Dunlap, who is an urbanist, strategic advisor, founder and principal of the Louisville-based Meta Agency. And she believes that changing mindsets and facilitating change through the built and natural environment are paramount to achieving vibrant lifestyles and communities. She is passionate about economic justice, cultural and historic preservation, and digital equity. She is a 15-year veteran of Louisville Metro government and served to oversee a multitude of real property issues, including but not limited to abandoned property, surplus public properties, and real estate development for both residential, commercial, and institutional uses. She's also a native Louisvillian and holds a Master of Science in Economics and a Master of Public Policy and Administration, both from the University of Kentucky, and a Bachelor of Science in Economics from the University of Louisville. And she was honored with the 2019 Harvard Lead Fellowship and was part of the 2020 Bingham Fellows at Leadership Louisville. And just wanted to thank her for coming. She's going to do a presentation on redlining and its historical context and its impacts now. And so I will turn it over to her and we will get started on that. And then I'll follow up. Then it will be an engaging discussion. So we will be doing some back and forth.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Terrence, for the invitation to be with y'all today. I know it's pretty significant, us coming back in person, right? So bear with me, I'm a little out of practice myself, used to sitting, behind the screen as opposed to being in the room with folks. So it's good to be here today. And as Terrence mentioned, I've been doing redlining conversations and dialogues throughout the city since about 2017. And just when I thought that everybody was pretty clear on what these issues are about, it seems like I'm always encountering people who've never heard of redlining. Even people, say, in the banking industry who are not familiar with the concept. So the discussion never gets old. And of course, my understanding about this has continued to evolve over the last several years. But it's something that's really paramount to discussions around the wealth gap, particularly between African Americans and other citizens in the United States. But it's certainly not limited to the United States. These issues occur, I've learned as I built my worldwide network throughout the world with regard to dominant culture and marginalized people. So I'm really proud of this photo. This is me and Richard Rothstein, who wrote a really big book around the same time that we published our dialogue, or started going doing our local dialogues. He published The Color of Law, which is really an exhaustive accounting of the federal government's participation, if not instigation, of a new set of parameters and requirements where the banking industry would get supported through the Federal Housing Administration and its predecessor. And so it's pretty startling to learn how complicit different levels of government and different professionals, particularly in the real estate markets, have colluded over decades. That partly explains some of the outcomes that we see today.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I have to turn the spotlight off of the camera because they can't see it online.
Oh, okay.
So sorry.
Mhm. Oh, so you're not doing share screen?
So now.
Thank you, Terrence, and good morning, Gina.
Good morning. That sounds like Ann Che.
It is, and I'm hoping that you don't mind backing up because I wanted to see the picture.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
Just real quick.
Mhm.
All
Okay.
right. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes. He was a keynote speaker at the Metropolitan Housing Coalition's annual meeting that year, and he sees rocking the famous apron, yes, in my backyard, as opposed to NIMBY, not in my backyard. So
That's right.
we've been having these conversations in Louisville since at least 2017, and the conversations continue as people's understanding grows. So here, just to give you some context for those who may not be as familiar, is the legend on what you would see on a residential security map, sort of alluded to in the background of this book cover: red, blue, green, and yellow areas laid out and assigned a grade, a 4-point scale, A, B, C, and D, coordinating with the colors green, blue, yellow, and red. And particularly the 4th grade, or the D grade, is where the term redlining originates from. These maps, residential security maps as they're known, were prepared by local real estate professionals on behalf of the Division of Research and Statistics at the Homeowners Loan Corporation, like I said, the predecessor to the Federal Housing Administration. And it was really interesting because they recruited local professionals to this work. Here you'll see a snapshot from the professionals that were recruited to prepare the Louisville residential security maps. And it spans a cross-section of real estate professionals, appraisers, bankers, and somebody wants to be admitted. Are you the master controller?
I am not.
Okay, should I let in W. Melvin?
Brandon should be, it's okay, you can keep
I
going.
keep going, okay. Real estate appraisers, realtors, the city tax assessor. I think it's really interesting, because I recognize some of these names immediately, like Paul F. Simonin, right? Like one of the biggest real estate firms still to this day. And other interesting names like Gustav Flexner, is the Secretary and Treasurer of the Greater Louisville Federal Savings and Loan Association. So, it wasn't like the federal government, parachuted in and made these decisions. They recruited local people, particularly local men, who were in the business, serving every aspect of the real estate market, which could get pretty complex if you're familiar with real estate and transactions and things like that. But it's also interesting to note this assessment, or at least the dawn of redlining policy in this context, came across in the late 1930s. But years earlier, Louisville was the basis for a famous Supreme Court case known as Buchanan versus Worley, which involved two sides of a real estate transaction where the concept of breaking up or busting blocks, right? So, there were local ordinances in place at that time in the early 1900s that said if a block was primarily white, that Black people shouldn't move in, and the same vice versa, that if the block was primarily Black, that they didn't want white people to move. And that was to keep the races apart. But members of, I believe Mr. Worley was a member of the NAACP, and they sort of used this case to make a point around administrative or local ordinances that dictate where people can live. And they won that case. And the winning of that case at the Supreme Court set a tone throughout the country that said municipal laws cannot be used to orchestrate or dictate where people live, right? But as is common with a lot of things, the country found ways to innovate around that, right? And we'll get into that a little bit more later. So at the time, around 1937, and there's ways to get at what they call the executive summaries or memorandum that explain the context around the reports. And so this is an excerpt from what those particular gentlemen said in the Louisville context about what good mortgage lending should look like. And so it talks about, it says, these maps and descriptions have been carefully checked with competent local real estate brokers and mortgage lenders, and we believe they represent a fair and composite opinion of the best qualified local people. In using them, we do not mean to imply that good mortgages do not exist or cannot be made in the C and D areas, but we do think they should be made and serviced on a different basis than the A and B areas. So we do think they should be made and serviced on a different basis than the highest grade areas relative to the low grade areas. What does that say to you all? Like, if you had to, read between the lines, so to speak, what does that indicate to you? Just that little statement at the end. Anyone? Well,
Means folks in the C and D don't get the preferential service levels.
exactly. And that's a very diplomatic way to put it. They don't get the same preferential treatment in the mortgage and real estate markets, right? In fact, I would go so far as to say that this is the precursor to what we now call predatory lending, right? And which contributed to the big mortgage crisis several years ago. So the 1937 methodology, as an urbanist who's into community building and placemaking, I found it fascinating, to look at how much data they utilized and pulled into the analysis as early as 1937. So they looked at the intensity of demand for rental housing or home ownership, much like we do today, the percentage of existing home ownership in an area, all of this information feeding into their assessments on whether an area is going to be green, top-notch, or red. Age and the type of the buildings, the economic stability of the area, public utilities, right? Accessibility to good schools, whether or not there were churches and business corridors in the area, transportation methods, and general topography. All of those being the same types of criteria that we use today in any informed analysis. But there are, in words, some differences, things that we don't do today, which were the order of the day at this time. So one, there were restrictions, also known as covenants that run with the land and follow through on the title that set up protections, meaning that, preventing the integration of certain people, be they immigrants, people of a certain religious persuasion, and certainly African Americans. The general rule of thumb is that you didn't want infiltration, is often the word that they use, or what we would call integration. And also they relied on the social status of the people that lived in the communities that they were surveying, including race, occupation, and national origin. But here, what you see is an image of a typical covenant or clause in a deed regarding race. And I'll read it. It says, no property in said addition shall at any time be sold, conveyed, rented, or leased in whole or in part to any person or persons not of the white or Caucasian race. No person other than one of the white or Caucasian race shall be permitted to occupy any property in said addition or portion thereof, or building thereon, except a domestic servant actually employed by a person of the white or Caucasian race, where the latter is an occupant of such property. And it's no accident that this clause is listed right next to the clause again, around animals, right? So it's very explicit, very clear what the intention was. And this is what I would call an innovation in redlining. So whereas municipal ordinance couldn't dictate and control and contain people based on the Supreme Court case, private citizens could write these clauses in their own personal contracts. And that was considered perfectly legal and enforceable at the time. And in fact, it played into getting better ratings, which contributed to being able to get better access to capital. So not just, so getting a mortgage in the first place, but then making sure that that mortgage was being let at a fair amount of interest. The two things do work together. So there's a big project online. If you're into doing online investigation or just interested in interactive mapping, there's a project called Mapping Inequality, Redlining in New Deal America. And here you see a snapshot of all of the residential security maps and these assessments that happen around the United States around the same time in history. And so Louisville, of course, is no exception, but what I found on the site were the original redline maps for 3 of our major cities. So here you see the redlining map for Lexington, Kentucky, right? And I think it's interesting at that time in Lexington, around the same time, like I said, the late 1930s, 15% of the area was graded A, whereas 20% was graded B or still desirable. 39%, the vast majority of Lexington was categorized in the C category as definitely declining. And then 26% was graded red or red line for hazardous, meaning if you're in a green area, you could definitely get a mortgage the lenders would originate the mortgage, and they were going to be backed by the federal government in the event of any default, which makes it, a lot easier to take that risk when you know the federal government is going to step in to bail you out. But 26% of the areas rated D meant that they were likely not going to get a standard or conventional mortgage, regardless of whether they were trying to purchase an existing house or build or construct a new house. The demographics around 1940, the total population, this is probably just the city proper here, as opposed to Fayette County, 49,300 people, 72.7% native born white, 26.2% African American, and then 1% foreign born white. Here's a snapshot of the residential security maps for Covington, Kentucky. Here, 21% were graded green or best, 34% in the B category, still desirable, 36% graded C in yellow, and then 9% graded D. Here, it's interesting to note that the population of Covington was graded. It looks like they crossed the river too, because as we know, market economies often cross over those types of boundaries. But 62,000 people, 93% native born white, 5.1% African American, and then 1.9% foreign born white. And then finally, in terms of the grades, the maps that came out in this area, we have Louisville's residential securities map, 14% graded A grade, 16% graded B, 42% at C, and 27% at D. And it's interesting just to look at these broad, swaths, how much of these cities was graded, declining at the time, especially given what we may respectively know about these places today. But in our demographic, 319,000 people, 83.3% native born white, at the time 14.8% African American, and 1.9% foreign born white. Now, because I'm born and raised here in Louisville, I'm most familiar with sort of the present day observations for this analysis, for this presentation. I'm going to focus primarily on Louisville, but I just wanted to make the point that this is not unique to Louisville, that there were residential security exercises throughout the state and certainly throughout the nation. So the project that I mentioned that was launched in 2017 is called Redlining Louisville. If you Google it, you can get to the front page here, and I really encourage people to spend time with it. It's the best analysis of the impact of redlining on a particular jurisdiction that I know of. So you can go here and actually pull out the memorandum for every area that was carved out. They typically don't follow neighborhood boundaries as we know them today. But the tool, which was designed by Joshua Poe, can help you sort of reconstruct and match up where you are now in the city of Louisville based on what was going on, 80 some years ago. So I definitely encourage you to check out the mapping project. But let's, sort of dive into what these residential security reports talk about. So here's a beautiful postcard of Churchill Downs. It is Derby time, right? And, Derby's always been, Louisville's always been known, it says here, is America's friendliest city. And I feel we are pretty friendly. We like to have a good time. Like I said, we're about to go into full Derby swing here. But let me read you some characteristics of one particular area. It said the favorable influences is that it's one of the highest restricted residential areas in or around the city. And when they talk about restricted, they're talking about the types of covenants the types of covenants that I showed you initially, right? So contains many estates located on the ridge in the north part of the area overlooking the Ohio River with 3 golf courses nearby. Detrimental influences, they said, was a lack of adequate transportation, but the type of population makes that unnecessary. Yeah. Inhabitants, businessmen, executives, and capitalists. Foreign-born families, none. Negro families, none. Availability of mortgage funds for home purchase or home building, ample, right? And then clarifying remarks, this section around the club is around this country club estate property, the Indian Hill subdivision, Mockingbird Valley, have ample restrictions for building homes from $10,000 up. The Lightfoot subdivision is also well restricted, but not so high as the other portions. Brownsboro Road, which bounds this area on the south, is a 4-lane highway leading to Cincinnati. And so this area received an A grade. So regardless of the fact that there was inadequate transportation, right? This area was going to have ample access to credit for home building, and they had additional restrictions saying that the value of the home you built in the 30s needed to be $10,000 up, which I don't know what the exchange is, if you put that in real dollars, but $10,000 back then was a lot of money. Contrast that with Russell. If you're unfamiliar with the legacy of Old Walnut Street in Louisville, this is a snapshot of Old Walnut Street. And this was the Black business corridor before urban renewal, before the name of the street was changed to Muhammad Ali Boulevard. The Russell neighborhood used to go as far east as 6th Street. And it's ironic that there was a separate Black business district because 4th Street was a regional retail location, but African Americans weren't really welcome on 4th Street to shop. And so we had our own thriving business district here with multiple movie theaters. You see the streets are active with business. In fact, Ed Hamilton, our famous sculptor, his family lived above this mixed-use building here on the corner, and his parents ran a barber shop at the old Mammoth Life building, which is now the River City Bank building. But Russell, what can I say? It's the home of the Black middle class, tons of Black-owned businesses, mixed-use residential and commercial, walkable streets, amenities. I mean, urban planners and city designers would give tooth and nail to create this type of environment today, right? So we had that, and unfortunately, we don't have it any longer. In fact, here is the report, or some details from the report prepared, by HOLAC and their local experts. So favorable influences, all the city conveniences close to the principal business district. So what you saw in that image is roughly like 7th and 8th Street, the intersections of Muhammad Ali. In fact, there's the Cathedral Tower right there, and this building, tall building here at 5th and Muhammad Ali are still there. So detrimental influences. It's the red light district on the eastern side of the area, and the old type of large obsolete houses, as well as the mixture of inhabitants. So when I hear reference to obsolete houses, I'm into historic preservation, and like Louisville is very well known for historic preservation. So the idea that the buildings you saw, in those images were obsolete and worthy, of I guess clearance, some clearance in some cases is hard to process. But the trend of desirability they noted as downward if possible. So knowing what we know about Old Walnut Street, can anybody sort of allude to what that comment might mean in this particular context? Downward, if possible. The inhabitants, cheap laborers, some Negro mechanics, foreign-born families, none, but Negro families, yes, about 80%. Infiltration, sort of when they talk about relief families, remember this was around the same year as the Great Flood here. And so a lot of people were dislocated from post-flooding conditions. So many relief families moved into the Russell neighborhood. Availability of mortgage funds for home purchase or building, none, right? Clarifying remarks. This is about the worst area in the city with low type property and inhabitants. Some Negro business extending out Walnut and Chestnut Streets, and the area was graded D. Right, so. Okay, I've lost control. I don't know why it's not, I just wanted to go back.
Oh, to go back.
Okay. Where should I use these things or little areas? Okay, yeah, going back one. And then it keeps, there we go. Thank you. This is the worst part of the city, they said. Does that look so bad to y'all? It's pretty good to me. I mean, especially if you consider, we're in a post-code environment and what downtown is looking like right now. Like, and this wasn't even downtown. This wasn't the central business district. This was the Black business district. So trend is desirability over the next 10 years, 10 to 15 years, downward if possible. What do we think about that? What's the if possible? I mean, we used to be known as Possibility City, right? Any insights, clues, ideas about what that means in this context?
It seems like.
Mayor Farmsley, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Please.
Mayor Farmsley, we have a clip of him at Simmons we use, but he referred to urban renewal as Negro removal.
Yeah.
And that's really what this demonstrates. It was just a means of removing Black people from the business sector in this city. It was, it's just obvious. Those facilities, those the revenue, wealth generation, potentially, it was a major disruption to that.
Yes, yes. My elders used to talk about things that they couldn't prove. And so when I had an opportunity to work with Joshua Poe and put this material out, I felt it really vindicated and validated a lot of the things that were shared about the struggle for fair treatment and all things around business. But this really clarifies intention. In fact, these papers were found at the National Archive and had been classified for several decades, just like the JFK papers were classified. So it wasn't until fairly recently that we even got access to these memoranda and could see what people said in their own words and piece together, the why. Was there another comment about the downward if possible? I don't know if I heard somebody or cut them off. No? Okay.
Gina, I was just asking if it's fair to say that this is just another way of depressing or limiting wealth accumulation.
Absolutely. We're gonna get deeper into that, by the end of the presentation. Some people think redlining just applies to bankers, that bankers were the only guilty parties. Well, I've already shown you appraisers were complicit, realtors were complicit, Even the property value assessor, the administrator was involved in the preparation of these materials. And absolutely the connection between having access to capital, having choice where you want to live, right? Especially if you can afford it, but having that choice, building equity is the cornerstone of social mobility and intergenerational wealth building. So you're exactly right. And so let's look at some modern day examples to get a sense on if or whether or how much impact those policies from the late 1930s may influence and still impact us today. So here you see two homes. The one on the left is 2,134 square feet with a detached garage. The one on the right is somewhat smaller at 1,427 square feet. If we revisit the red line map for one of the houses, you'll see it was pretty much in, I guess, a transitional area, but it was in a blue area, which is the second best grade you could get. And let's see what those reports said. So this area was graded B3. Favorable influences adjoining Reservoir Park and Crescent Hill Country Club, close to schools, churches, and community business centers, adequate transportation. Detrimental influences, there's a railroad that runs along the north side of Frankfurt Avenue. And if you're familiar with Frankfurt Avenue, that train still runs. It's really awkward. It runs parallel to the street. The whole neighborhood is impacted, because everybody has to use the same access points to get in and out. So that was a detrimental influence, but they still managed to get a B grade. The inhabitants, clerical and professional businessmen, foreign-born and Negro families, none. Infiltration, none, no risk, right? Availability of mortgage funds for home purchase and building, ample. Let's see, that gives you a sense. So that was a blue area, B3. Here's a different blue area. This is B16, and let's see what they had to say here. Favorable influences, overlooks the Ohio River, all the city conveniences, close to community business centers, schools, and churches. Detrimental influences, close proximity of a Negro park on the south. Anybody familiar with that Negro park? Chickasaw Park. Chickasaw Park was one of only two parks where African Americans were allowed to frequent. It was not only designed by the Olmsted family and as part of our Olmsted Parks and Parkway system. It's probably the only park designed by the Olmsteds that was exclusively for Black people, right? But we had two parks at the time, at one time. So that was noted as a detrimental influence in this blue graded area. Inhabitants, executives, business and professional, men, clerical, foreign-born families, none, Negro families, none, infiltration, none, mortgage capital, ample, no clarifying remarks, right? So the question is, okay, we got these two houses. The one on the left, when I recently checked, was assessed at $116,000, right? Land value 8 and improvements, the construction 108, assessed value 116. The one on the right was assessed at $299,450, right? So the house on the right, which is smaller at 1,400 square feet, got a higher assessment than the one on the left.
And no garage.
And no garage, right? So Chickasaw neighborhood, which is, in the area that you saw where they graded it blue and said there was a black park or neighboring and that was detrimental. That's the Chickasaw neighborhood. And this beautiful home is larger with the garage and has a considerably lesser value. Even the construction, it's stone, right? As opposed to siding of any kind. Curious. So here's another comparison. And like I said, you may be able to eyeball these areas and tell where they are, but let's take a look back at some of the red areas. So here we have an example of an area that was graded D, 13. Detrimental influences, again, the age of properties, the mixture of population. They don't have any racial covenants or restrictions. High waters flood this area for 2 or more blocks away from the river. Oh my goodness, they had saloons. And I mean, given how many new distilleries and breweries we have in town now, like that could be seen as a favorable amenity today. The majority of these areas were underwater in the January flood, it says. Inhabitants, laborers, clerical, mechanics, foreign-born families, 1%, some Dutch and Irish families. Negro families, yes, around 30%. Infiltration of relief families, many, because again, people were displaced. Availability of mortgage funds, it's set for home purchase, it says ample, and for home building, it says ample. So it says Negro population is south of Main Street, Portland Avenue, Bank Street, and a portion of northwest of 18th Street are the best parts of this area. The portion shown as Portland largely inhabited by people of Irish and German descent. Original owners, thrifty in some instances, have moved to better sections, but retain ownership of their homes here. The approach to the better portion of the area is through industrial and undesirable sections of the city. So this is interesting that they got a D grade, but there was mortgage capital available. What do we think that's about?
30% Black people around.
So, yes.
Inhabited by people of Irish and German descent.
Right.
There ain't lies to answer.
Right. What about the concept of absentee landlords? We hear about that all the time, right? That's the nice way to put it. Some people call them slumlords or what have, depends, but this concept of selling their property in this area, moving somewhere else, retaining it, and then leasing it out, definitely is another contributing factor to the ability to choose where you live and how you live.
And could this also be indicator of white flight?
Yes, right.
Because, whenever Blacks began to move into an area, it generated this movement out, and that's really the history of West Louisville.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when Shawnee was a blue graded area, and that was because it was only white people that were allowed to live there. That, of course, has changed over the decades. But it's interesting again to see how these threads continue to influence and impact current day conditions. So here's an area graded C in yellow. Detrimental influences, cemeteries. Beargrass Creek meanders through part of the area. It's very closely built up. It means it's dense. Factory workers, laborers, and skilled mechanics. Foreign-born families, about 10% German. Negro families, none. A few relief families. Home purchase, ample. Home building, ample. In a C graded area, which is next to worst. Clarifying remarks, that part of the area south of Oak, East Shelby, and north of Lynn in Texas is known as Germantown. Is occupied almost exclusively by people of German descent. Rents and sales prices in this section are stable, and no difficulty is encountered in either renting or selling, and there are very few offers. However, the type of house is not modern. almost no room for expansion. Bungalows mostly on Texas, and let's see, the part north of Kentucky contains the large 2-story houses, right? Gives you some insight to their rationale and some thinking. So any guesses, especially from the local folks, where this row of houses may be?
It's down on Chestnut.
I would say it looks older. So probably Portland.
Let's see.
Yep.
Portland neighborhood, exactly right. This is Bank Street in the Portland neighborhood. You see these beautiful brick shotgun houses, all well maintained. And this was their value, according to the PVA, when I last checked. 35, 43, 29, 27 for historic brick homes. So we look at this comparison. Shotguns, but not the same level of construction. So what do we find here?
When was this? Those numbers?
Christie Avenue in the Highlands. This would have been just what, 2021? 2020, late 2020.
I would love to see those today.
These houses
bet
are now
it's
worth
double.
twice as much.
I bet that's double today.
Right, but you see the dramatic difference between Portland and the Highlands. And it's interesting because the Highlands at the time was redlined to some degree, but it's interesting to see areas that were redlined that have become neighborhoods of choice today versus areas that were even blue lined then that have become, dramatically undervalued. So Terrence, I had sent you a link for a video. Is there a way I can get to that
Sure.
link? It's gonna come back if possible. Oh, I don't know. I don't know if you want to use, well, if it works, we can go for it. Okay. The sound's a little gnarled, but it should work. Hopefully.
Last year, Indianapolis native Carlette Duffy set out to buy her grandmother's house. Her plan? Refinance her own home, purchase the property. I did the application process when they asked, for, do you want to declare, race, gender, nationality? I did all of that. I said, yeah, no problem. Duffy expected her home, which she bought for $100,000 3 years earlier, to appraise for around $185,000. I was shocked. That it came back at 125. So I challenged it, but the appraiser stood by his decision and the lender didn't budge. So Duffy moved on, going through the process again, this time with Freedom Mortgage. The value placed on her home was even more staggering. It's $110,000, $15,000 less than the first one, which is less than 3 months earlier. Duffy again challenged the appraisal to no avail. Duffy applied again through a new lender. This time, she didn't disclose her race or gender in the application process, only communicated with the appraiser via email, and that wasn't all. I took all of these down. So they wouldn't be seeing my lovely ladies. I took them down. Right before we got to the appraisal portion, I met with 2 of my girlfriends. Both are married to white men. And I was like, okay, I need to borrow one of y'all husbands. When the third appraiser came, Duffy was gone. Her friend's husband posed as her brother.
I was a bit skeptical at first until we saw the results.
The result? Duffy's home was appraised for $259,000, more than double that of her previous 2 appraisals.
I screamed with joy. I was so elated. And then it quickly dissipated. And then I just cried. Because this is an actual, there it is. And that I'm the thing that's devaluing my house. The real problem is how we devalue people.
Andre Perry, a senior fellow at Brookings, studies devaluation in Black neighborhoods. Data shows Duffy's experience is not isolated.
It's almost as if when people see a Black neighborhood, they see
twice as much crime than there actually is. They see worse education than there actually is, and they value the home in that respect. On average, homes in neighborhoods where the population is 50% Black are valued at roughly half the price of homes in neighborhoods with no Black residents in U.S. metro areas. Even when controlling for crime, access to schools, and other factors, homes in Black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%. That's about $48,000 per home, totaling more than $156 billion in cumulative lost equity. We have several concerns about the appraisal industry. Amy Nelson is the executive director of the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. If a neighborhood has been systematically discriminated against because of the race of that neighborhood, decade upon decade, comps then are going to be skewed and they're going to have bias written into them. This month, Duffy and the Fair Housing Center of Indiana filed a formal complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, alleging race-based discrimination in both her appraisal and lending process. You are taking away my family's ability to create generational wealth, which is so much more than just words. NBC received statements from the first two lenders, both pointing to their use of independent appraisers according to industry standards. Citywide Home Loans denied any discrimination and said they are actively participating in the HUD investigation. Freedom Mortgage said they used an automated valuation model after receiving the complaint and stood by the appraised value. None of the appraisers named in the complaint responded to NBC's request for comment. As for Duffy, she used the money from the third and final appraisal to fulfill that dream of buying her grandmother's home. That's the house that my grandfather built. I hope to see my grandbaby raised in that house. And then for her to be able to then build on the legacy of her family.
And so, Anne, to your point, yeah, there's a connection. There's a relationship, right? And so when I talk about the evolution and intricacies of the real estate market, you know, so she able to get a mortgage, one usually must have an appraisal done, right? So the things are interdependent. I'll use a story from my own neighborhood. I live in the Limerick neighborhood, not far from here, the Central Business District adjoining to Old Louisville. In fact, I live in the upper circle close to Garland Avenue. And recently a house about 2 blocks away was refurbished, right? So I want to show you the differences between 2 houses in the same neighborhood, just 2 blocks away, that had appraisals done 2 weeks apart. And I know this because I know the gentleman who at one point owned this house. So one house, the house on the left, 720 square feet. It's a 1-story shotgun compared to the house on the right. My house, it's 100 years old, 100% brick construction, and 1,500 square feet according to the PVA's records. So one house, the house on the left, 1-story, not sure how many bedrooms it has, but it looks like a traditional shotgun where it's just room after room after room, right? And you decide what to make them. Wood and vinyl, condition above normal because the house had just been refurbished. Compared to 1.5 stories, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, wood, brick exterior and normal wear and tear. So when I was going in to refinance my house to take advantage of much lower interest rates, I got an appraisal at $62,000, which later wound up causing me to pay private mortgage insurance because my loan to value ratio was so skewed. The house down the street 2 blocks away got twice the appraisal, $122,000. How do we explain that?
Even though it's half the size.
How do we explain that? Any real estate people in here? Like, got the what explains that huge difference? Well, 2 different appraisers, sure. But we just saw the story out of Indianapolis and what happened. There are no shortage of stories, especially like in California. A couple got lowballed on their appraisal, at 900, like the price of housing is so much higher, $900,000, they got an appraisal, but the house was worth 1.5 million. So $500,000 in lost equity. They weren't able to refinance when the rates were favorable, and they just lost out on that whole deal and transaction. There's a story here of a couple that lives in the Highlands. They were refinancing, and they had an appraisal done, and then they had another appraiser come, but they had their house guest, an African-American man, to meet the appraiser and walk him through the house. The second appraisal came back at half what the first one did. Same house, same neighborhood, same year, right? So, there's no shortage of anecdotes and stories around how these systems collude to, depress or diminish what certain people have in life. So I, not just redlining, but, even red line thinking, prejudices and biases, even though they're not in the handbook or the rules, oftentimes play out, sometimes just by the very incentives, right? That all sort of work together to inhibit certain people, certain populations from acquiring wealth. It's what I call innovations in redlining. So just like when the Supreme Court struck down municipal covenants that said you couldn't integrate, right? The world innovated. I said, okay, well, we'll just write private covenants in our own contracts. And so, beyond just the banking industry, I'm concerned and appalled by redlining for much of the reasons that Ann sort of touched on earlier. People's ability to earn money for their work, well, that's not what African Americans enjoyed during slavery. We were property as opposed to working and being compensated for our labor. That involved into sharecropping. So people weren't owned, but everybody who's familiar with sharecropping in the area knew that the farmers got the shortest end of the stick, did the majority of the work for the property owner, and still would end the year in debt to the property owner that they've been breaking their back for, right? People didn't necessarily have a place to go during Reconstruction. They couldn't choose where they wanted to live. Even free people were limited and contained in where they could go. There's also this concept of convict leasing. Are y'all familiar with convict leasing? Anyone? So you heard of the chain gangs? Like if you've seen the movie Life with Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence, the chain gangs built the interstate highway system in the South, and they did it for no pay. If you were caught simply like loitering or like meandering around without, a purpose or a job, you could be convicted for that. And then they would put you to work as free labor on a chain gang. Again, so your ability to be in your body just because, but then to be forced, again, to work labor without paying compensation, that is not a social, social mobility, that doesn't create that. Ghettoization, a term I recently became familiar with. It goes as far back as the 14th century, but was really noticeable in Nazi Germany before Jews were taken to concentration camps. They were ghettoized, contained in a certain area, right? If you look at the patterns of development in Louisville, for example, whereas there used to be a majority of white people in Shawnee, and now there is not. Those people have moved to the outer portions of the county. And then now, the West End has become known as the Black part of town, right? Where the disinvestment feeds upon itself. Was that by design? Was it purely random? I'm not sure that I can prove it in a court of law, but the coincidences and the correlations are hard to deny. Then came redlining. Then, because Black people couldn't get access to mortgages, they often participate in what's called contract leasing. Y'all familiar with contract leasing? Where you buy a house on contract. And so instead of dealing with the conventional mortgage broker, right, you deal with the person who's essentially selling you the house and say, there's a book on it called Family Properties. Chicago was the innovator in contract leasing, especially after redlining became policy. So they would, buy a house from a white person because they were afraid that Black people were moving in for one price, then sell that house for probably twice the value, typically a 70% markup to a Black family, knowing that that Black family could not get a conventional mortgage. So instead, it's kind of like buy here, pay here. Like, you're responsible for maintenance and upkeep. You're responsible for making this payment. Oftentimes there were code deficiencies, so they had to fix the house. But then if that buyer missed a payment, then the leaseor just repossessed the house with all their money and often their life savings invested in the house. And Chicago was the biggest market for this. Again, it was an innovation around, certain things that couldn't be done by municipality, but people made tons of money and destroyed many lives through this practice of contract leasing. And that still happens today. People are still buying properties this way without understanding the risk and exposure to themselves and their assets. Payday loans, another type of debt trap that keeps people in a position where they're not able to thrive financially. Even if they are working, if they can't manage to pay all their bills, they go to a payday loan place and pay 300%, 500% interest. Well, of course, if they needed to get a payday loan, they can't afford to pay egregious amounts of interest. But that's exactly the trap in the cycle that they get locked into. Rent to own places, very similar concept. My grandma always took me to the DAB. If we were gonna buy, used furniture, you just buy a used sofa, right, at the DAB. But that's not what happens. People are lulled into paying for their sofa, their TV, their refrigerator at enormous amounts of interest. By the time they pay the whole contract, they probably could have had 2 refrigerators, but they paid the rent-a-own company. Mass incarceration is sort of, reminds me of convict leasing, but we've got more people in prison in the United States. And oftentimes a lot of those prisoners through the prison industrial complex are working for pennies on the hour, constructing garments in ways like the chain gang operated. But it's big business, right? But it's also impacting the individual's ability to be, citizens contributing to society. Cash bail plays into that. Like sitting in jail simply because you don't have a certain amount of cash on hand keeps a lot of people locked up and behind bars, which means they're not working, which means if they have, say, child support, they're not able to meet their child support obligations and can also go to jail as a felony for that. But right now, what's most concerning for me and what I see is perhaps even the new Jim Crow is digital redlining. The Office of Civic Technology at the University of Louisville did a study on where high-speed internet is available. We all know how important good internet is now that we've done so much meeting virtually. The patterns are exactly the same. The areas that were redlined in 1937 are the areas that are dark with high-speed fiber internet, right? So the pattern continues, the impacts remain and are real. And so just, you know, in wrapping up, you know, redlining, like I said, it's not just about banking, right? In my opinion, redlining is also a mentality that shows up and through the combined effects of what we might seemingly appear to be unrelated systems, but they all do. When you think about a person and intersectional identity, the amount of pressures on people and their ability to thrive or survive or build wealth are highly diminished through these practices and the innovations that we've witnessed in that. So the absence of access to fair credit, to me, remains one of the most persistent challenges, or like, I'll even say fair service. You know, I'm not so sure when I walk into a dealership, or look, I'll speak for maybe the ladies. When we go to the mechanic, or when we go to buy a car, a lot of times we take a man with us because we're not so certain that we're going to get the same deal without the man being present. Well, the similar premise is at hand when it comes to race and ethnicity. I'm not so sure, you know, when I'm looking my appraiser in the face, that they're giving me a fair assessment. You know, if I go to a jewelry repair shop, I don't know that they're paying as much attention, you know, to my jewelry and, you know, taking the least amount of time and giving me the best rate that they might be giving their other customers. So it comes, even restaurant service, it comes up and, you know, intuitively, a lot of us feel it, but the impacts are certainly real and beyond intuition. For my final slide, I just want to acknowledge the people that got me on this path of in dialogue and guidance around redlining. Joshua Poe, who's a brilliant GIS and professional and urban planner who designed Redlining Louisville, which still lives on the internet today. Dr. Blaine Hudson, who challenged Joshua to find the documents at the National Archive, and Carolyn Miller Cooper, who was a partner with me inside Metro government to get this dialogue out in the open. And so with that, I'm done. Questions, comments?
Still goes on.
Still goes on. The fight is not over.
And it goes on in 3 levels. Native American Indians, Hispanics, Asians. I spent 2 weeks ago, I was in San Jose, California. They had a sign up in the middle of downtown where the majority population burned the entire city where the Asians lived to the ground, May 2nd, 1887, because they were productive and they were trying to stop them. Interesting concept. It still exists today. They don't burn the place down much anymore, but.
I'm just trying to get it to everybody to see, everybody, without turning this back over.
And another question. Go ahead, Ann.
Gina, thank you. You know, I think one of the things that I'd like to say is that Gina has done amazing research. She's presented some incredibly good information. Can you move that back so I can see Gina? I'm kind of trying to talk with her a little bit. There you go. So, but I think, you know, Gina has hit the tip of the iceberg. You can't build a house in West Louisville today. It won't appraise for as much as it costs you to build it. And so things like this inhibit improvement. Gina, there was the neighborhood revitalization study that HUD did. Out of 1,500 jobs in West Louisville, less than 100 were held by neighborhood residents. And it just goes on and on. And Gina, if you would you just talk also briefly about the construction of the interstate system and how that sort of, and then I'll hush.
Yeah. The interstates, again, if you go to the red line in Louisville map, there's a historical timeline. And you can see, so much like Old Walnut Street disappeared. It's urban renewal, kind of preempted by redlining. Most of the areas where our modern day expressway, 65, for example, cuts through several neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods were yellow and red areas in the 1930s. Again, when you think about eminent domain and legal takings, the basis of what people have to be paid in exchange for a non-voluntary acquisition for something like the interstate was greatly reduced. But then it also choked off neighborhoods. Urban planners put a lot of time and thought into the street network, the grid, the design, how the city functions. Unfortunately, most interstates, not just here in Louisville, but around the country, have either obliterated predominantly Black, poor, or people of neighborhoods of color, and changed the way those neighborhoods can even interact. When one day you can just walk a block to see your best friend, the next day you gotta go maybe around the corner. It's terrible, but 264, the Watterson Expressway, what it does through West Louisville, just breaking down connectivity. How many dead end streets are we aware of? And notice they typically coincide with an expressway. So that wasn't always there. Those neighborhoods weren't always disjointed. But yeah, it's had a tremendous impact on community.
And I would venture to say that properties that had to be secured to do that did not get the proper remuneration that they should have in order to cut through the areas that they did. And that's probably another study in terms of inequity, in these various expansion projects in Louisville that have happened. I'm even the airport expansion, I don't know all of that, but it's just been a lot of what I think is key in what you have shared, Gina, is the chart showing from 1619 to 2022, because there are a lot of people today who feel like slavery was back then, slavery was abolished, so everything is peachy keen since that. And no, this stuff is still evident and is still prevalent, and the effects of it are still going on today. And and there are efforts to hush, quiet, don't talk about it, don't remind us that's in the past. Well, if the past is still happening, it's not the past. It's just being, I like the word innovations. We find new ways to do the same things. And and it's infuriating that we cannot seem to burst this bubble in this nation. And what we're seeing here in Louisville is replicated throughout the country.
Yes.
So even some of the implications of our cases where people, how they're being handled by their landlords and how they're being talked to, and all of this, we have to have a lens based on your presentation and other things that keeps us more alert and our senses up to pick through and see where these issues are affecting our people, our citizens.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, are there any other questions from any commissioners regarding the presentation?
Commissioner Worth.
Terrence, I just wanted to say thank you to you and Ms. Dunlap. I have found this meeting to be probably the best meeting I have attended on this commission. And just Ms. Dunlap, you have given me an education. I am embarrassed personally about my lack of education on this. I'm a 54-year-old man. I grew up in Western Kentucky. I now live in Northern Kentucky. And I feel like I should have been aware of more of these dynamics. And I appreciate you helping me to come into that awareness. I work with abused children and neglected children in the custody of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I'm drawing those magic lines between the effects of such adverse community environments that you're pointing out and why that has a correlation to the unprecedented number of children of color who often end up in the foster care system in state's custody. These type of financial barriers and these economic impacts have real life consequences for other systems that we may not be immediately connecting. There's a disproportionate number of children of color in our state's custody and foster care systems. And the question is, what are we doing systemically to address that? I think your presentation has really lit a fire under me as a CEO of a child welfare organization in Kentucky. And I'm just really very grateful for your presentation today.
Thank you so much.
If I could say to your comment, Commissioner Worth, the purpose of The Color of Law, and I have that book right here, and we have brought Richard Rothstein to Simmons for one of our book reads. So he's been to Louisville. And the purpose of his book, he started looking at the differential of academic attainment, academic achievement for children. And he stumbled upon redlining based on the geographical understandings of where children who were not performing well in school, where they lived. So that's how The Color of Law and his findings, he was going after it for one thing, but as he began to look at the data, he discovered this redlining concept. So, you know, this is serious, and it is the perpetual neglect of Black children in particular in learning and developing is linked to this redlining issue. And so when you get this book, read it in that understanding. It is an eye-opening encounter. And thank you so much, Gina, for the way. And I'm just moved today because of how you have talked about the lady in Indianapolis and your situation here in the Limerick. Simmons is right here in the Limerick neighborhood. And I know that house and watched it, and your house versus the craftsmanship of the house that was just renovated and all like that. It's absurd that that's what's going on even today, right here in this city, and it's happening across the state.
Commissioner Smith, I will be ordering that book today. Thank you for that.
Okay, are there any other questions from any commissioners? Gina, thanks a lot for your presentation in terms of very informative. Yes.
If I could, Gina, what role would you say the commission could play in addressing some of these systemic issues?
That's a great question. You know, I'm not well versed on what latitude or authority the commission has, but what I think would be a game changer is taking private appraisals public. That is, you know, in my research, when I'm doing real estate research, I can go to the public record and pull up the deed, see what attorney closed it, what they paid, who the names are, right? And what the sale price was, right? But some people get, but that does not tell me what the appraisal was. The valuation processes of the property value administrator are also somewhat clandestine. I don't understand, you know, that there's no controversy there, but I'm saying a simple step would be to mandate that appraisals be made public. I'm not sure why anybody would have a problem with that. The appraisal industry, they have their standards. I've tried to learn a bit more about the board of appraisers and how they govern themselves. But just the ability to have more transparency with a significant driving force of the mortgage industry, mortgage access, I think it has the potential to really change the climate.
Okay, any other questions from any commissioners? Okay, let's go to you, Clarence. You need to wrap up your executive director's report, so we'll move on to.
You said that.
No, just, yeah.
Just wanted to thank Gina for coming and speaking with us. The last thing that I had, just as a follow-up for the homework that I got at our last meeting, to look into at the request of Vice Chair Smith, some of the steps we could take as a commission in relation to the issues in the Louisville Metro Jail. And Joe and I had a run through of our enabling statutes and talking about some of the things that we are allowed to do and charged with doing. And so the thought that we came to that I wanted to just lay out there, and we can come back to it at some other point, but just the creation of we'll say task force, but just a collection of individuals that are involved and could be instrumental in looking towards a solution and also understanding some of the issues, as well as reaching out to work with the part of that would be reaching out to the law firm conducting the overall investigation into what went wrong, but just bringing these people together and holding conversations about some of the issues and possible solutions, but having them through this lens of the Human Rights Commission. And so being able to bring people in and having conversations like that seemed the most advantageous and goes along with our statute in things that we are enabled to do. And so just wanted to bring that up as something as an option. It would be, I already meet weekly with a group of stakeholders who have been having these conversations, but having a forum that we could use our authority and our name and our mission to bring people into this room right here, and having some people, and it wouldn't be an adversarial task force, but people from the jail, for example, would be part of that group to just have those open conversations in a transparent manner in this very room. And so that was what we came to from looking through 344 and our community requirements or charges. So that was just something I wanted to bring up to you all as the conclusion of my report.
I just have one quick comment, not going back to her presentation, but could you do maybe a communication campaign with her information or post it on a website and maybe send it out to the city's housing committees and encourage them to maybe share the information with the communities? Can we post it on our web?
I think you do it, but I guess a lot of what Gina presented, she's made several presentations around the city of Louisville who have looked at that. And in fact, when Rothstein was here in Louisville for one of his presentations, the mayor of Louisville gave a response to his presentation in terms of, and made a commitment that the city was going to do something in regarding redlining. And to my knowledge, Frank, we have not seen anything, have we?
No, and no, and no. There has been no movement at all by our local administration. And again, I'm grateful that the information came up and the research, I think it's helpful, but it seems that that's it. There's no repair there. It's pathetic that something this egregious is not being dealt with in this city more aggressively.
And to your, go ahead.
This commission at one point used to issue studies and reports that people did read, did take notice of. And, with the limitations of funds they have, we haven't been able to do that. But I think that the discussion around the jail and this issue represents an opportunity for us to revisit doing something along those lines, if not on the scale that we did it before.
And to your question, one thing I was going to, I stared Joe down about us looking into what Gina mentioned at the end. But another thing I want to do is I've added a portion on the website that's related to issues that we are looking at. And I want to do a link to the redlining project on our site, and then we can post that it's there so people can go in and interactively and look at that. And so that's something I want to do in the next week. So I really wish that there was a recording of that presentation when they unveiled it in 2017. If I could find that, that would be great to also link to that. But that is something that we can do.
Any other questions or reactions?
I have a comment. Just I don't know if it is the right time to say that, but just want to put you at current about something that is happening right now in the city regarding the Hispanic community. Currently, there is a huge exodus coming from Cuba, and there is thousands of people from my country arriving to the city. I'm working very close with the Kentucky refugee minister. And just for giving an example, this week, the first 3 days, 500 Cubans have arrived to the city. In the last year, more than 100,000 Cubans have left Cuba, have been coming to the United States, and Louisville, which have been doing a really good job receiving immigrants, is actually getting a lot of them. So I'm just letting you know what is happening, because in the next few months, you probably will see, more input from the Hispanic community. And in the same way, I want to say thank you, Gina, for the presentation. I learned a lot. I want to say that even with all these problems, I love this country. I appreciate your attitude for welcoming us as an immigrant. Again, it's not a perfect country, but to me, it's the best country around the world, where my community have found a lot of opportunities, no matter the race, the religion, the language. I'm still learning and struggling with my English, and I have to sit here. So this is an example. And I want to say thank you to you all for receiving, for welcoming us, and for giving us all the tools for achieve our dreams. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, reaction, questions, or any of those things? But I guess really the two action items which Terrence has, follow-up, Terrence has agreed that he's going to post the presentation on the web in terms of where he goes. And we need to think about that, and the discussion around creation of a task force looking at the jail. I think that doesn't need any commissioner approval, something that you can just go ahead and proceed with in terms of what we need to do.
Thank you.
Next up is the budget and personnel report. Brandon.
Good morning. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person. I wanted to meet those of you that we've never seen each other in person before, but my son is ill and I woke up a little congested and I decided to proceed with caution. You have my report before you. Unfortunately, we didn't receive the general funding for some requested administrative positions, so we are still definitely short on staff, and it looks like we will continue to be, but if you have any questions, I'll field those now.
Any questions for Brandon? Brandon, when I look at what your budget and look at our per month expenditure level, and knowing that you told me before, state now rolls June's payroll over into July. If we got April and May to do, are we gonna end up being over budget for the year, or at least the budgeted? No,
Be close.
yeah, it's close.
Yeah. I have spoken with the governor's office for policy management, the Office of State Budget Director. If we need additional federal funds, we can increase our federal appropriation probably sometime in May if it looks like we're going to be over budget. So that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Let's move to enforcement, and Cynthia, you're gonna give it that to us.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
On the case recommendations, you have 25 cases from enforcement unit. We are pulling one case, 20788H. It's a conciliation, Quinn versus Jacobs. The other cases that are being presented are 1 administrative closure, 2 conciliations, 3 reconsiderations, 16 NPCs, 1 withdrawal without settlement, and 1 withdrawal with settlement. And staff is available to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions from any commissioner regarding enforcement staff's report? Let me just make a couple of comments in terms of, I appreciate the adoption of Commissioner Cheney's spreadsheet charts. Excel gives us a very, very good view of that, and I'm looking at the trend in terms of where we are. And when you look at it, we may have made a tremendous amount of progress, or you all have made a tremendous amount of progress over this year, and you have to be commended for that. I guess a couple of follow-up questions that I have was, one, in looking at the number of housing cases, and we end up there, we have 19 that are over 100 days. You don't have to do that now, but I'd like to know how many are over 200 days. And I think that's it for that in terms of those. But again, thank you for these charts. It makes the review a lot easier. Okay. Any questions by any of the commissioners? So what we'll do, I'll ask for a motion to approve the recommendation of the staff, excluding 2 items. One, the Eubank case 2078H0420 that's been pulled, and ask you to vote separately on 9306E, which is Cardale versus University Hospital, in which on that one I will abstain because of my position with the University of Louisville Board of Trustees. So can I have a motion to what I stated?
So moved.
It's been moved. There's a second?
Second.
Just moved in second, that the staff's recommendations, with the exception of the Eubank case and the Cardale versus University of Hospital, be approved. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you for that. Now, can I have a motion to approve the staff's recommendation regarding Cardale versus University Hospital?
So moved.
Is it second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second that we approve Cardale versus University Hospital. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And for the record, notice that I did abstain from voting on that matter. Anything else from you, Cynthia?
No.
Okay. So we're now down to education outreach, Marianne.
And Juan, I have the privilege.
Oh, you're gonna do it. Okay, I'm sorry.
Good morning, commissioners. Miss Marian Taylor asked me to give her report. You have her report, but she asked me to share a little bit more information about the activities that the unit has done and will be doing. Today, you know that is not today, but this month is known as the Fair Housing Month. And this is the time where many organizations, including the Kentucky Human Rights Commissions, makes an additional effort to educate the general public about fair housing laws. So Ms. Marian Taylor could not be to present her report because she was speaking or she's speaking, to give a presentation in a fair housing event with the Lexington Fair Housing Council. So that's the reason I'm here. But as you have in your report, that the unit has been doing quite a few education outreach activities across the state. So my colleague, John Fisher, is stationed in Northern Kentucky in Covington's office, but he has been working on a fair housing event that will happen on the 23rd, working closely or with the Covington Human Rights, Covington Housing Authority to educate the population there about fair housing laws. Other events I would like to highlight, when you see in a report about trainings for local human rights commissions, as you may know that there are about 23 human rights commissions across the state, and they are under the city or county government umbrella. And with the exception of two, that most of these local human rights commissions do not have the funds, the resources to receive and investigate complaints. What they do a lot of referrals to us. So when we are in the community to train them, we just want to make sure that they understand the cases or the work that we do, so they can refer us the cases that we can do, and the cases that we cannot investigate them, they can refer them to other government agencies. So they have been very important to us, but in our trainings, we've given that 2 hours training, explaining what we do and how we process our complaint. So we make sure that they have a good understanding about our complaint process. When you see fair housing trainings, that means we spend about 2.5 hours trainings, educate the general public. And in our training, sometimes we can tailor to specific group of audience. So if we have a group of real estate individuals, licensees, or housing providers, again, we're trying to tailor our information specifically for that group. Or we go to the general public, we focus more what a tenant can do. And the same thing when we do with the employment trainings. In our employment trainings, we can divide it into sexual harassment training, to age discrimination training, or to the disability training. So again, it really depends the audience and also depends what we're asked to do. But most of our trainings last about 2 hours with the questions and answers. I want to echo in our training, I forgot to mention that Commissioner Hendry has been very supportive in the past many years, over 20 years. She has hosted this type of events. So if any one of you commissioners would like to host a training, we'll be happy to do that. But I want to echo back to what Commissioner Luis Fuentes mentioned about the Spanish-speaking population. It is true that we have a great inflow of immigrants, Spanish-speaking individuals to Louisville. And it's true, the Cuban population is one of the highest inflow rates coming to Cuba because of the job opportunities. We know that Amazon and other with the new companies that will be open in the town, they're just attracting this labor force. And I can say I'm lucky that I'm ahead of what's going to happen in the economy, because most of our Cuban fellows, they work in the truck industry. So I asked them, how are you busy? How's the business? They say, we're extremely busy. So it indicates me that the economy is doing well because they're moving goods and services around. So, but that's a population that we need to give more attention as well. Thank you, Commissioner, for bringing up that topic. But that's my spiel about the trainings that we do. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer, or any specific events that we do, we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Juan. We are really proud of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Juan from any commissioner? You know, your first statement about the 23 other city and local human rights commission around the city, if we could have invited them today to hear this presentation, would have been good. So as we think about programming going forward, just issue them invitation to join us for those parts of the meeting, so they get the benefit of that added knowledge. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is up our legal unit report, Jeff.
Yes, thank you. So as you can see, the legal unit report has changed in format a little bit. We're trying to make the information a little bit easier to discern. We have also changed the section pre-charge activities. Upon review of some of the statutes that we are bound by, it's position of legal that we were disclosing too much information in that section. We are supposed to keep pre-charge preliminary activities private. And so we're making a more concerted effort to do so. However, once a case reaches the probable cause determination, we can disclose more. And so you will see that information, cases that qualify, you still have a pretty robust report. We have, there's one development, everything that has happened since the prior meeting is disclosed here, except for one case. And that's on page 4, the Key versus Easy Auto Sales and Sprinkles versus Easy Auto Sales. At the time we sent the report, we had just filed an AOC 280 asking the court to rule. The court did rule 2 days later and affirmed the hearing officer's order in that case, awarding damages to 2 complainants for race discrimination and public accommodations. So it's a 10-page order. The judge did a very thorough analysis and affirmed the award and upheld the commission's actions. So we have a victory there. And I want to congratulate Colt Sells on an excellent briefing in that case. And he has been taking very active steps in moving cases along quickly, getting solid resolutions. And the next focus, of course, I am a month and a half in, and we're going to turn towards older cases and get those wrapped up. We still have a few that are floating out there, particularly some housing cases that we're going to get resolutions on as quickly as possible. I'll answer any questions if you have them.
Any questions for Joe? Okay, hearing none, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Next up is committee reports. I don't think we have any for this day. The bylaws committee, there's a document that they have submitted that we're working through in terms of updating that, and hopefully by the next meeting, we'll be in a position to bring it back to the body for its review, evaluation, and possible approval.
Yes.
Any new business? Okay, I guess under new business is that Commissioner Worth has requested or suggested that we do 2 things. Is one, change the date of our June meeting from the 16th to the 23rd, and also that meeting be held in Northern Kentucky at his place, which from, in terms of, I have no objection to doing both of those. The only proviso that I would add to that is that I probably won't be able to make it to Northern Kentucky on the 23rd. That's also the University of Louisville Board of Trustees meeting and also our budget day. But, if there does, what's the will of the commissioners in regards to that?
Chairman, may I just mention quickly what prompted me to make that suggestion?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Commissioners, I'm just trying to be cognizant of the fact that there's a disproportionate number of Kentucky children who are LGBTQ who are also disproportionately represented in the foster care system. I mentioned earlier about the disproportionate number of children of color, but the same holds true for LGBTQ youth. And Children's Home of Northern Kentucky is the only organization in the Commonwealth to have achieved the highest certification of culturally competent care with these youth. We're certified through the National Human Rights Campaign with the All Children, All Families certification. June is Pride Month. One of the thoughts was that if the commissioners were willing, we could have our typical meeting from 9 until noon at the Children's Homes Events Center, and then we would follow that with an outdoor lunch on our front lawn overlooking downtown Cincinnati and the Ohio River, and maybe hear from a few speakers. One of the speakers that we've lined up is the new sheriff of Hamilton County, Ohio, Charmaine McGuffey. Charmaine, years ago, when she was employed as a sheriff's deputy in Hamilton County, came out of a gay bar in Covington with some of her girlfriends, and they were targeted by law enforcement. And she was put on paid administrative leave for no other situation than she was coming out of a gay bar in Covington. And here we are decades later, and now she's the sheriff of Hamilton County, Ohio. We would like to bring her back to say a few words, and perhaps have the mayor of Covington there to award her the city, the keys to the city, and also just to have a few other speakers there. It would be just a great honor to have the commissioners from this commission to put a spotlight on the citizens of the Commonwealth who are LGBTQ during Pride Month. So thanks, commissioners, for that consideration.
Any comments or anything from any commissioner? As I said, I'm inclined to agree to holding the meeting on the 23rd of June and for that to be held in Northern Kentucky. So unless I hear, so unless I hear an objection, that's what we will do. Which also means, Commissioner Smith, you will have to run the meeting. I didn't get a reaction. Okay.
I will have to run the meeting.
You can turn his camera off for that one.
Okay. Well, that's it. So that's any other new business, any announcements that anyone needs to make? Again, our next commission meeting will be on Thursday, May the 19th. And again, we're planning it will be a hybrid meeting on that day. And that concludes what is on the agenda for the body. And I guess then without objection, we will stand in adjournment. Thank you all for your time and thank you for your attendance.
Thank you all.
It's good to see people in person.